This is New York City, the financial center of the United States and the world, considered by many as the gateway to America. It has a long, rich history. In and near New York City, 10 national parks, many of which preserve the rich history of this United States of America. In this program, a brief introduction to Federal Hall National Memorial, the site of the first capital of the United States, the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island National Monument, Hamilton Grange National Memorial. Alexander Hamilton was one of the most famous founding fathers. Governor's Island National Monument, home of Fort Jay and Castle Williams. Grant's Tomb National Memorial, Theodore Roosevelt Birthplace Home, National Historic Site. The African Burial Ground National Monument, Sagamore Hill National Historic Site, St. Paul's Church National Historic Site, Gateway National Recreation Area, and Fire Island National Seashore, with a brief visit to the 9/11 Memorial. At the corner of Broad and Wall Street, Federal Hall National Memorial. Across the street, the New York Stock Exchange, the world's largest financial market, listing companies in excess of $19.5 trillion. On the site of present-day Federal Hall, the first president of the United States under the Constitution, George Washington, was inaugurated on April 30th, 1789. The original building, built in 1700, was demolished in 1812, with this structure, built in 1842, as the U.S. Custom House. The statue of George Washington by John Quincy Adams Ward was unveiled in 1883. There were many firsts here: the first counting of votes for President of the United States, the first Congress of the United States met for the first time, creating the First Amendment to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Judiciary Act. Visitors here learn about the country's first Congress, George Washington, and New York City. There's an impressive colonnaded rotunda inspired by the Parthenon in ancient Greece. A large Gateway to America and Discover New York City pavilion is a great resource for information about attractions in New York City and the national parks of New York Harbor. One of the more interesting exhibits, the New York Weekly Journal, a popular newspaper published in the 1730s before the Revolution by Peter Zenger. Journalist Zenger was critical of the local governor, which eventually led to his arrest and imprisonment for libel here. Even though he was acquitted, his lawyers argued successfully that truth is the perfect defense against libel. The building served as a sub-treasury with millions of dollars of gold and silver stored in its basement vaults until the formation of the Federal Reserve in 1920, replacing the sub-treasury system. Federal Hall Memorial is open to the public, free of charge, to explore artifacts and exhibits from the formation of this great country, including the Bible used to swear in the new president. Without question, the Statue of Liberty National Monument is the most iconic of all the national parks in the region. This is the symbol of the gateway to America so many have dreamt of entering. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Poet Emma Lazarus' words are part and parcel to the most recognized symbol of America, the land of opportunity and freedom. Over 12 million souls passed through immigration on Ellis Island, which became part of this national monument in 1965.
In many ways, everybody in this country has immigration as a part of their family history, as a part of their personal stories, whether it's through voluntary immigration or through force. Each of us started out in a different place and came to this country. Again, not necessarily by choice, but came to this country. And that's part of what Ellis Island represents. It represents a new beginning. It represents the opportunity that people were seeking in this country. Why do people come to this country today? In many ways, they come for the exact same reasons that people came during the heyday of the Ellis Island immigration. They come for opportunity. They come to escape repression in their country of origin. They come because they hear that things are so good in this country. They come because they have relatives that are in this country. It's part of what makes our country great. And it's part of what we do at this park is we want people to think about those decisions, to think about what's involved in those decisions, to think about what that means today, to perhaps learn from what we understand happened historically and apply that learning to solving some of the problems of today. At the Statue of Liberty, it's the very same thing. In the world, the Statue of Liberty is one of the most recognizable icons in the world. She is important both for the people who come here and the people who will never have the opportunity to be up close and personal to her, but for whom her existence and her symbolism means so much. The universal symbol of freedom, of hope. And again, part of what our role is to stimulate discussion and reflection and debate about the changing meanings of liberty, the changing meanings of opportunity here at Ellis. That's why this is such a special place. The Statue of Liberty has a very strong identity with the city of New York. The New Yorkers claim her as their own, although, of course, again, she's the nation's and the world's monument. But she has a very strong historical association, standing in New York Harbor, welcoming people for so many years. Now, of course, she's a symbol of the resilience of this country and this city. Ellis Island is the place where over 12 million people took their first steps in this country as they made their pilgrimage to become members of this country. We're standing by the main building on Ellis Island, which is the building where immigrants were processed. The people who actually came to Ellis Island, not everyone coming on the boats who came through Ellis Island. The steamship stopped in New York Harbor first, and the passengers who were in first or second class got off, got a precursory examination, and then went into the country. The people who came through Ellis Island were the people who were in third class or steerage class, meaning they traveled at the bottom of the boat, and they were the people who came to the island to be processed before they were allowed entrance into this country. So imagine how it might have been. You spent days, possibly weeks, mostly in the bowels of a ship, crowded with lots of other people, and here's where you arrived. Here's where you were transferred from the steamship to a smaller ferry or a barge, and here's where you came. You were carrying all your belongings, all your personal belongings. You weren't quite sure what the future held for you. That's right where you got off. The immigrants got off the boat. They brought all of their luggage with them, and they went into the main building. We have it set up as it looked during the time that the immigrants came through. And then they went through a series of inspections and questioning about their health, to understand how much money they brought with them, to understand if they had any political questions that might cause concern. One thing that always intrigues me was called the 6-second medical inspection. And as the immigrants were going up the stairs to the Great Hall where the processing occurred, there was a medical examiner standing at the top of the stairs watching people. And if, for example, somebody was out of breath as they were climbing the stairs, they'd get to the top of the stairs and someone would put a mark on their shoulder to say, we really need to look at this person in more detail because perhaps they have a pulmonary problem. And so they would be put into a line and taken for a more detailed medical inspection. Imagine how you might have felt as an immigrant, because your whole future was riding on what happened during the next several hours. And maybe you came from a country where a uniform was something threatening to you because of your experience with police or military. And there was this person standing at the top of the stairs watching you. I think it was a pretty incredible experience. The other medical examination that they did that I would find quite amazing, and actually you should look for this while you're on the tour, is they did an eye examination. So they took a hook, basically, and pulled back your eye. They were looking for trichomonas, which is an eye disease that now has a cure, but at the time did not have a cure and was highly contagious. And it was basically a sewing hook. So you can imagine, you come up the top of the stairs and somebody holds back your eye and takes this thing and says, I'm holding back your eye, you don't understand what they're saying. It must have been a very, very frightening process. It took a lot of courage, it took a lot of hope and determination, and that's what people needed to come to this country. But there was a lot of fear associated with it. If your papers were in order, and your boat arrived at a reasonable time during the day, generally it took 3 to 4 hours to be processed. If there were problems, or if your boat arrived late in the day, then you had to stay overnight. If you were sick, then you were taken to the hospital, where you stayed either until you were cured, or if you had an incurable disease, until the steamship company could take you back to your country of origin. One of the very compelling stories that I think of is people in the isolation wards in the Ellis Island Hospital who had incredible views of the Statue of Liberty, and that was going to be their only experience of the great opportunity and the great freedom of this country. A lot of sobering thoughts involved in the incredible stories.
There's another part to the Ellis Island story. Though most believe all of Ellis Island is in the state of New York, a significant portion is actually in New Jersey. In 1998, the Supreme Court ruled that Ellis Island, gateway to millions, was actually in New Jersey, not New York. That is, most of Ellis Island. Actually, the original 3.3 acres on which the main hall and immigration museum stand remain in New York. The remainder of the island, about 24 acres, is New Jersey's. Here there are 29 historic buildings in extreme disrepair, but all have stories to tell. The Save Ellis Island Foundation, formed in 1999, has been raising money and managing restoration here in partnership with the National Park Service and the state of New Jersey. Judith McAlpin, a former president of the organization, was a key figure in launching this massive stabilization and restoration effort.
The buildings on the island were built by the federal government. I believe at the time, most of the construction was done here. This that you're looking at is roughly 1900. So most of New Jersey's section of Ellis Island has been unused and deteriorating since 1954, when the Coast Guard, which was the last sort of official tenant of the island, departed. New Jersey set about studying the implications of this island, having public hearings, looking at ways in which the public might be engaged, and considering ways that this island might be restored and reused. Came up with some recommendations. A study committee came up with some recommendations to Governor Whitman, who was in office then, and out of that, Save Ellis Island was born. It's a very expensive process to restore buildings, but there's no doubt that many of the spaces here on the island are historically and culturally significant. So those spaces will be restored and interpreted for visitors who come to the island just the way some of the spaces inside the Great Hall are right now. Those spaces may include some of the special hospital facilities. There's a morgue and an autopsy theater. This was a teaching hospital at one time. Some laundry and laboratory facilities. Some of the wards where here early attempts to really control contagion were put into practice and refined. So those kinds of spaces will be available for visitors to come and see. The first building that was built, it's called the main hospital building over there, was opened right about 1900. And it had no sooner opened than they realized they'd outgrown it. Already the need was tremendous, and so they kept right on building. And down the front side, on the other side of the ferry slip here, you see the three main hospital buildings. But over behind those buildings is another whole campus, really. There's a large section of contagious disease wards, affectionately known as the measles wards here, because measles, of course, was a contagious disease and, in fact, a killer at that time. And some pavilions, some rather special buildings that were used to house and control contagion with the most virulent kinds of cases. And it was unique. It was the most modern facility of its kind at the time it was built. It was really the cutting edge of public health medicine. We're standing in front of the ferry building. This is a new building, relatively new, on the island. It was built in 1934. It was part of the Works Progress Administration's project, a WPA building. It replaced a Victorian structure that had been here since pretty much the time the island began to be active. And this was a very kind of happy place, because the people who were leaving, who had successfully been through the screening process, departed from the ferry building here. They took a ferry either to Lower Manhattan, or they took a ferry to the railroad terminals behind us, sort of in New Jersey. The Central Railroad was one of the larger ones, and you can in fact see that from some parts of the island here. It's the same vintage. And my great-grandfather went all the way to Wisconsin after he left here, and my story is only one of hundreds and hundreds of thousands, just like it.
Through an enlightened and creative team, there is now a plan to transform this legacy of American immigration from the rubble it was rapidly becoming to an extension of the Ellis Island Museum. The upper floor of the Immigration Museum in the main building is packed with exhibits detailing the island and country's immigration history. Self-guided audio tours in many languages help navigate the exhibits. On a lower floor in the museum's Family History Center, computers, where families can search digital records of island arrivals to trace their personal tie to Ellis Island. At Ellis Island and at the Statue of Liberty, ranger-guided tours help visitors learn more about this magnificent monument.
I promise there's no more security, and you may use your cameras as much as you like. You can start right here with the original torch of the Statue of Liberty. This is the torch that the statue was holding in 1886 when the Statue of Liberty first came here to New York. Now, it's actually the oldest part of the statue. It's the only part of the statue that was done on time. Now, the Statue of Liberty we know is a wonderful gift of freedom, of friendship from the French. But a lot of us don't realize that it was supposed to get here in time for our 100th birthday here in the United States, which was 1876. Got here a little late. A lot of time and effort was spent building the entire Statue of Liberty, over 20 years. The only part completed on time, and here in the United States on time, was the torch. Then it was returned to France, added to the rest of the statue. They dismantled the whole thing and sailed it across the ocean in time for 1886, over 10 years later. But still, we appreciate it as a wonderful gift of friendship. Now here you can see the torch right here in front of us. A lot of changes happened to the statue over the years. They tried to make the statue into something more than just a symbol of freedom. They wanted to make the statue into something more practical. They decided to make her into a lighthouse, but not just any lighthouse, the first electrical lighthouse in the United States, in fact, in the entire world. They cut some more holes into the flame, trying to make it a little bit brighter, added some more light bulbs. Still, it didn't work. They ended up cutting over 250 holes into the flame. Lots of light bulbs, still not that bright. It was a waste of time, a waste of money. But the biggest issue is that they were cutting holes, putting openings into the flame. So over the years, lots and lots of rainwater was leaking into the statue, gallons and gallons of water over the years. It started to cause the statue's torch to rust and corrode from the inside out. So by the 1980s, when the statue was nearing her 100th birthday, that torch was extremely wobbly, very, very weak. It was so far gone that it was beyond repair. It had to be replaced. And that's why we have the original torch right down here. They took it down in 1984, and French artisans came over here and rebuilt the torch, made an exact replica, and put that up on the statue in 1986. Here we are face to face with Lady Liberty. This is a replica of her face that we put into the museum just for us to get this up close and personal view of the statue's face. We can of course also touch it. Now I encourage you to touch it because you can find out just how thin the statue is. Now we know she's completely made of copper, but the copper, they're very thin sheets of copper. They're hammered together, and riveted together. So it's all done by hand. The copper was chosen because it's a nice thin metal, it's very malleable, it's soft, you can shape it into whatever shape you need it quite easily, but then you made it a little bit more rigid by putting bars behind it. At first they were made of iron. In the 1980s they changed them to stainless steel, much stronger, less susceptible to rust and things of that sort, not reacting with the copper as much. Another thing that they were really looking forward to with the statue is the fact that it would turn green. That patina, that crust that develops, actually helps make the copper a little bit more rigid, a little bit stronger. So they expected it and they wanted it to happen. Now, over here we have some models of the Statue of Liberty. It took over 5 years to come up with the final design of the statue. And this is what Bartholdi, the sculptor, came up with in 1875. That's pretty much what we see with the statue today. Now you can see lots of symbolism here with the statue, and he actually wanted you to see the name of the statue when you looked at her. Her actual name is not just the Statue of Liberty, that's much easier to say. Her entire name is Statue of Liberty Enlightening the World. Okay? So of course, enlightening the world. You see that torch, her most important symbol, a symbol of light, of justice, of freedom. She's holding it up high for the whole world to see. And then on her head, you can see a crown. It makes her regal. I call her the Queen of America, probably one of our most important symbols. But also that crown has 7 points. That represents the 7 seas and the 7 continents, the entire world experiencing that light of liberty. And then in her left hand, that tablet, what does it say? Anyone? Any guesses? Okay.
And this is a ranger guided tour that will last 45 minutes. And you are now in what I call the heart, the centerpiece of Ellis Island. This is known as the Great Hall, also known as the Registry Room. In this one building here, millions upon millions of people have walked through the same floors that you're walking on right now. And by the way, the floors that you're on right now, this tiling here, the floors go back to 1920. These floors are 85 years old, ladies and gentlemen. Now, imagine something. What is a typical day like here on Ellis Island for an immigrant? Well, the average processing for most immigrants went around between 5 to 8 hours. Depending on the reason and severity, you could be here longer for an X amount. So, ladies and gentlemen, when an immigrant came in the same way everybody walked through here today, all right, and they walked inside the building, they were greeted by military uniform-like personnel. Now, to most immigrants, this struck fear. Why? Because in an immigrant's native land, a person wearing a uniform is not exactly very friendly. They're not there to help you neither. They're there to do the opposite. And they were told, drop your luggage off downstairs and walk up the stairs. And ladies and gentlemen, the stairs were right by the flag over here. The stairs were moved over here because there would be an inconvenience blocking the public from walking in if it was a museum. Back then, when it was an immigration station, it was easy access. So if you dropped off your luggage downstairs, there's good and there's bad. The good is the fact that there were actually your hands free. The bad, there were unfortunately, some people who worked here who knew there was no organized baggage check, so they went through people's things and they took their valuables. Immigrants started to catch on, As their family members and friends came through, they told them, listen, take your items with you. Everybody, please make yourselves comfortable.
America's first immigration station was here at Castle Garden, renamed later as Castle Clinton. Completed in 1811, Castle Garden, or the Southwest Fort, was built to complement Castle Williams on Governor's Island as a defense of New York Harbor from British forces preceding the War of 1812. 28 cannons that could fire 32-pound cannonballs over 1.5 miles were the battery. It never saw action in that, nor any other war for that matter. It's at the south tip of Manhattan Island in Battery Park. In 1855, Castle Garden opened to receive immigrants and did so for 34 years until operations moved to Ellis Island. Over 8 million immigrants passed through the castle to new beginnings in the United States. A few hundred yards across Buttermilk Channel from the southern tip of Manhattan is Governor's Island, one of the longest continuously occupied military posts in the United States since the late 1700s. In 2001, Governor's Island National Monument was established here. It's part of a 90-acre National Historic Landmark District, preserving nearly 2 centuries of military architectural heritage. Travel to Governor's Island is by ferry, which is free. It leaves from the old Staten Island Ferry Terminal, which has been remodeled. Governor's Island National Monument is open from Memorial Day weekend to the last weekend in September, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. weekdays and 7 p.m. on the weekend. Fort Jay and Castle Williams are historic military fortifications that played significant roles in the history of the United States. Fort Jay began as an earthworks defense built by Continental Army troops in 1775 and 76. A few years later, the fort was expanded and improved, eventually becoming an important part of America's coastline defense system. This is a star fort in design surrounded by a moat, which is usually associated with European forts, generally filled with water. But in North America, the design was used but left dry, open ground through which left the enemy exposed to fire as they crossed. The sculpture on top of the fort's sally port, the Trophy d'Armes, created in the 1790s from red sandstone, is one of the oldest carved monuments in the country. Between 1807 and 1811, Castle Williams was built to further enhance coastal defense. By the 1830s, the castle's usefulness as a fort had waned, so it was converted to troop barracks, then later remodeled again as a military prison. It housed prisoners of the Civil War, then continued as a military prison until 1965. The Park Service is in the process of stabilizing and restoring Castle Williams. The lower floor is open now with regularly scheduled escorted tours of the roof. Governor's Island stayed under the control of the Army until they handed it over to the Coast Guard in 1966. It was a major Coast Guard installation for 30 years, eventually closing in 1996. The island became the headquarters of the First Army by World War II, playing a significant role in international affairs as well as the success of Allied forces during World War II. Governor's Island was considered to be a particularly good posting, beneficial to an officer's career and a step up the ladder to promotion. Soldiers stationed here were exposed to a vast network of social, political, and commercial interests. Fortunately, the significance of the island's military history and architecture was recognized early, so it was possible to save this magnificent example of America's military from the wrecking ball. The island has become a magnet for social functions during the summer months. Concerts, dance parties, receptions, and a variety of other events fill the calendar here. The City of New York committed to invest over $250 million on Governor's Island to develop public spaces, a park just a few minutes from Manhattan. Biking, hiking, along with simply enjoying the outdoors, just minutes away from one of the busiest metropolises in the world, is a dream realized by those who planned the development. The concept is working. Over 85% of the visitors to Governor's Island are residents of New York City's 5 boroughs. There's even a public high school on the island, the New York Harbor School, funded by the New York Harbor School Foundation. Alexander Hamilton was one of this country's founding fathers, George Washington's right-hand man. This is the Alexander Hamilton National Memorial and the house he built on his estate in Harlem. It's the only house he ever owned. It's been moved twice, once by a subsequent owner, then it was purchased by the National Park Foundation and moved again to a more suitable location for a memorial and dedicated as such in 1962. There are exhibits at the memorial to give you an understanding of who this remarkable and somewhat controversial man was. During his career, he was a military officer, a lawyer, member of the Constitutional Convention, political philosopher, author of the Federalist Papers, and the first Secretary of the United States Treasury. He was the author of President George Washington's economic policies. He was also adamantly opposed to slavery. Several rooms have been restored to the period Hamilton lived here. Hamilton was killed in a duel by a political rival, Aaron Burr. This is the African Burial Ground National Monument in the Civic Center section of Manhattan at 290 Broadway. It was on this site that thousands of African Americans were buried across several acres in the late 17th and 18th centuries in America's largest colonial-era African American cemetery. The burial ground was closed in the 1790s and forgotten. The land divided and sold off in parcels. It was rediscovered during construction of the Federal Building in 1991. Work was halted, and after much negotiation with the black community and proposals from both sides, the site was established as a National Historic Landmark, eventually becoming a national monument in 2006. The remains of 419 souls were reinterred here as a symbolic gesture of respect for those who had previously been laid to rest and forgotten. The Monuments Museum tells their story. Ulysses S. Grant National Memorial is another of New York City's national parks. Overlooking the Hudson River, Grant's tomb is a proportional mausoleum that honors the great Civil War general who led the Union to victory in this country's Civil War. A national hero, he went on to become the country's 18th president from 1869 to 1877. He and his wife Julia are entombed here in red granite coffins in an open crypt. Grant was known as a kind and humane president who, during his term, pardoned many Confederate leaders and worked to protect the equality of former slaves. Internationally, his style was one of arbitration and discussion rather than the threat of war to settle disputes. Theodore Roosevelt's birthplace National Historic Site is just off Broadway between Union and Madison Squares. A typical Manhattan brownstone in a quiet neighborhood is where young Teddy, as he was known as a child, spent the first 14 years of his life. In his first 10 years, he was a frail and sickly child. After a particularly grueling trip to Europe, his father admonished young Roosevelt that he had the mind, but needed to get his body to catch up with his mind. He began exercising daily on a gym his father installed, got himself in shape, and moved on with his life to eventually become the 26th President of the United States, among his many other accomplishments. The Park Service offers guided tours Tuesday through Saturday. They're open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Tours take about 40 minutes and are limited to 18 visitors. Sagamore Hill National Historic Site was President Theodore Roosevelt's unofficial summer White House from 1902 to 1909. Sagamore Hill is in Oyster Bay, a small Long Island community about 30 miles from Manhattan. There are guided tours of the Roosevelt home, which on this particular day was being reworked. 3 of the Roosevelt children were born and grew up here, with the entire family enjoying all the outdoor recreation the Oyster Bay region of New York has to offer. It's a 23-room rambling Victorian that is little changed from when the president lived here. Most of the furnishings are original. In 1905, Roosevelt brought the envoys from Japan and Russia together in his library and helped initiate meetings that eventually led to the Portsmouth Treaty and end to the several-year-long conflict between the two countries. A short walk from the house, the Roosevelt Library, with an extensive collection of the president's memorabilia and historic documents. St. Paul's Church, National Historic Site in Mount Vernon, New York, is where one of the oldest parishes in New York was established in 1665. It became a national park in 1978. The first structure here was a small, square, unremarkable wood building known as the Church of Eastchester. In 1778, after it burned, it was replaced by the present-day building, St. Paul's Church. Guided ranger tours are scheduled during open hours Monday through Friday, and usually every second Saturday from noon to 4 p.m. George Washington worshipped here, and later President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The church's organ is original. It's not been restored, but repairs were made as needed. It still delivers a magnificent sound. The instrument's bellows were converted to electricity in 1918. In the bell tower, the original bronze bell cast in 1758 by the same craftsman who did the Liberty Bell. During the Revolution, George Washington ordered the bell hidden so the British couldn't melt it down for ammunition. Some say it was buried, but the conventional opinion, it was covered with straw and hidden in a barn. The church closed in 1977. Fire Island National Seashore is another national park near New York City that's a favorite for city dwellers. In 3 hours from New York, the Park Service estimates over 2 million people visit Fire Island and the various communities on the island that are within the seashore. Miles of beaches are most popular during the summer months, but a favorite of many in the fall and spring. There are marinas for boaters and water sports activities. Tent camping in the dunes, just a short hike along the Watch Hill Boardwalk from parking, is another popular activity here. Hiking along the many wilderness boardwalks is a great way to see the park, but not disturb ground cover on the delicate sands below. The Sunken Forest is just one of many nature trails in the park. The Otis Pike Island Dune Wilderness is the only federally designated wilderness in New York State. Off the island, a separate unit of the National Seashore preserves the home of American Revolutionary General William Floyd, located in Mastic Beach. It was added to the seashore in 1965. 250 years of history are preserved at the William Floyd Estate. The old Mastic House contains a variety of architectural features and artifacts from 3 centuries of American life. The Gateway National Recreation Area, added to the National Park System in 1972, was recognized as an innovation in bringing outdoor recreation to an urban environment. Gateway's 11 sites cover over 26,000 acres of land and water in New York City and New Jersey. In Brooklyn, there's Canarsie Pier, Floyd Bennett Field, and the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge. Queens has Breezy Point, Fort Tilden, and Jacob Riis Park. On Staten Island, Fort Wadsworth, Great Kills Park, and Miller Field. In New Jersey, Fort Hancock and Sandy Hook. Ocean swimming, birding, canoeing, nature walks, history, fishing, biking, hiking, concerts, sporting tournaments, and other special events are all part of these remarkably varied park venues, all within the reach of surrounding city dwellers. At Floyd Bennett Field, there are 32 tent campsites and 6 RV spots. On Staten Island, there are 7 tent campsites. At Sandy Hook, there are 20 tent camping sites. As with all the national parks featured in this series, the only way to truly appreciate the worth and value of each is to visit in person. We're just trying to provide a little encouragement and incentive to do so by touching on as many highlights of each that we can in the time we have. At Floyd Bennett Field, in the old control tower, is a small museum outlining the field's rather colorful history. At Hangar B, which is open to visitors Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, the Historic Aircraft Restoration Project, a National Park Service volunteer program to restore and preserve historic aircraft. Hangar B, originally constructed during World War II by the Navy, it served as a base for one of the squadrons of the Naval Ferry Command. Aircraft being restored here represent planes used from the beginning of the municipal airport era in the 1930s through 1971, when the field closed. Rotorcraft and fixed-wing machines from the U.S. Navy, Coast Guard, New York City Police, and Air National Guard are represented and being restored by the volunteers. On the north end of Staten Island, Fort Wadsworth is one of the oldest military installations in the country. Battery Weed, in the shadow of the Verrazano Bridge, and Fort Tompkins guarded this passage, the main approach from the Atlantic to New York City during the 19th century. Fort Wadsworth was an active military base until 1994. A year later, it was turned over to the National Park Service. At Sandy Hook in New Jersey, beaches, biking, and hiking are all part of the experience. For history buffs, Fort Hancock, a World War II-era military installation, plus the Sandy Hook Lighthouse are historic treasures that offer a glimpse into another time. Restoration of fort buildings damaged by Hurricane Sandy is still in progress. The World Trade Center Memorial, though not a National Park Service property, is an integral part of any visit to New York City to pay tribute to those killed in the 1993 and 2001 attacks. It's also a monument to freedom and the bravery, tenacity, and endurance of life in New York City and America. The National Park Service has almost 400 entities it lists as official units of the National Park System. In addition to national parks, this list includes military parks, battlefields, historic sites and parks, historical parks, monuments, preserves, memorials, recreation areas, parkways, trails, wild rivers, scenic riverways, sea and lake shores. But as they say in those infamous infomercials, but wait, there's more? Over 80,000 more national treasures within the Park Service fold. Natural landmarks, historic places, heritage areas like Motor Cities in Detroit, or smokestacks and silos in rural Iowa. The vast collection of natural and historic sites within the National Park Service purview is what this series, Discoveries America National Parks, is all about. Once finished, we'll have over 40 one-hour programs to help you explore this vast and remarkable United States of America. Thanks for watching this episode of Discoveries America National Parks.